And we are so pleased to welcome you and to thank our lovely neighbors, Temple Israel, for letting us use this space. And I want to introduce Betsy Jacks, our executive director, who will then introduce David Barnes, our introducer, who will then and I believe Stephen Hannock has something to say. So I hope you have enough time. But we have refreshments afterwards, and we will welcome you then. So thanks for coming.
Welcome, everyone. This is our annual fall lecture that we have named after the late Raymond Beecher, who was responsible for leading the charge to save this site. So we call this the Raymond Beecher Memorial Lecture. And we reserve this spot for the most exciting person we can find in the universe to talk about Thomas Cole. And so you're in for a treat. And I would also like to announce next year's show, which you're the first to know. That's one of the advantages of coming to this lecture. So next year, as you may know, we rebuilt Thomas Cole's new studio. And inside it will be a spectacular exhibition on Thomas Cole as an architect. And you'll be borrowing this enormous painting from Toledo, The Architect's Dream. So for the first time, we'll be able to exhibit paintings of that caliber where they were made. I mean, isn't that it's about time? So we hope to see you all there. So I'd like to thank a few of our sponsors. This lecture was made possible by the New York Council for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. We're very grateful. And I'd like to introduce our introducer, as I said, David Barnes, who's now also our associate director. So, Stephen.
Thank you. If anyone else wants to give an introduction today, just let me know. All comers welcome. Welcome to the Thomas Cole House, to Temple Israel, and to this, the 10th annual Raymond Beecher Lecture. And thank you for spending this beautiful afternoon here with us. How many of you are here today for the very first time? Amazing. Welcome. Thank you so much. Welcome. Come back. Bring your friends. Glad to have you with us. How many of you have been to at least one Beecher lecture in the past? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And finally, last question, I promise. How many of you knew Raymond Beecher? That's great. The hands get fewer and fewer every year. A great man without a doubt, and a visionary. It's amazing with Cole's new studio finally standing across the way to see this site become exactly what Ray envisioned. I mean, we're all gathered here today for a lecture series he envisioned and named. So I want to talk briefly today with you about people with vision. Now, the two amazing women who preceded me here today always start the introducing, and no one ever introduces them. But if you want an example of two people with bold, unerring vision, you can do no better than Betsy Jacks, our executive director for the last 12 years, and Lisa Fox-Martin, our chair, for the last 11. If you didn't know, and there are some of you new here today, they are the two guiding forces behind this site. The amount of work they do is staggering, and they do it with such incredible energy, passion, intelligence, and foresight. They have but one shared fault. Oh, yes. And that's that they make it look easy, which makes it easy for us to take them for granted. So help me avoid that by joining me in thanking them for their superb leadership. So one thing I've learned, it's good hanging out with visionaries. I don't mean Nostradamus-type visionaries. I mean those people who look at the same thing everyone else looks at, but they see something different. Thomas Cole did not invent the wilderness. It was already there. And every early 19th century American knew that wilderness was scary, frightening, dangerous, not something you want a picture of hanging on your wall. But Cole looked at that same wilderness and saw something different. He saw in it something America had that Europe did not, something that made us unique. And in his paintings, he would make us see in our wilderness nothing less than our national identity. Raymond Beecher was just one of many people who could see, as I did when I first came to Catskill in 1998, that the Cole House was falling apart, literally, just months away from the wrecking ball. But Ray looked at that wreck and he saw something different. He saw pretty much exactly what you see today, 17 years later. A valuable part of the heritage of our region and our country, and not just a restored historic home, but a center for learning about American art and culture. We are today the buzzing hub of scholarly and artistic discovery that Ray envisioned. Now, to call an artist like Stephen Hannock a visionary is not exactly news. Most artists are to some degree. But if you've seen our exhibition, put on in partnership with our good friends at Alana, entitled River Crossings, Contemporary Art Comes Home, then you already know that nothing like this has ever been done here before. Certainly Stephen and co-curator Jason Rosenfeld had seen Alana in the Cole House before, and it goes without saying they had some familiarity with contemporary art. But putting contemporary art in these two homes, well, that hadn't been done since Thomas Cole and Frederick Church were considered contemporary. Talk about looking at something in a different way. Well, now they have all of us doing it. We continue to thank them, not only for the record crowds, which Ray Beecher would have appreciated, but for something equally dear to Ray, advancing the scholarship. And one big way this exhibition has advanced the scholarship was when, not a month after it opened, an article appeared in Apollo magazine entitled Return to the Source. Written by today's speaker, it was, as you may have guessed by now, visionary. We know Ray, we knew then he would simply have to come to Catskill to talk about it. Dr. Tim Barringer is Paul Mellon Professor of the History of Art at Yale University, where he's also chair of the department, specializing in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century art of both Britain and the British Empire. He's also an expert in 19th century American and German art. Now, Dr. Barringer is a prolific author who has written books and exhibition catalogs on subjects ranging from the Pre-Raphaelites to Jamaican art, and from Peter Paul Rubens to David Hockney. His most recent catalog and exhibition, Pastures Green and Dark Satanic Mills, an exhibition of landscape painting from the National Museum of Wales, has already been to West Palm Beach and Pittsburgh. Right now it's in Salt Lake City, and it's going to come to the Princeton University Art Museum in January of 2016, so please, I encourage you to go see it. Of course, here in Catskill, Dr. Barringer has made a name for himself with the book and blockbuster exhibition he co-authored and co-curated with Andrew Wilton, entitled American Sublime. The critics called it, and I quote, stimulating, dazzling, glorious, astonishing, and my favorite, bliss unadulterated. Now these were European critics who had not seen these works the way American audiences had, which makes those adjectives a little more exciting for me. Now, we have, I think, 3 copies of this book today available for sale, so if you want one, do rush out as soon as the lecture's over and grab it. Mr. Barringer will sign all 3 copies. I think it'll take about 60 seconds, but thank you for that. More recently, Dr. Barringer gave us our 3rd Beecher lecture, which some of you may have attended, a brilliant talk entitled The Englishness of Thomas Cole, which he was uniquely qualified to give. That essay is now available as the first chapter of Nancy Siegel's great collection of essays, The Cultured Canvas. So like I said, I really enjoy hanging out with visionaries, and I bet you do too. We're thrilled to have for our Beecher lecture today a scholar who looks at our current exhibition and sees things no one else sees, and teaches us all to look at things in a new way. But before he takes the stage, I'm going to have a man who needs no introduction tell you a few more things about him, and that man is Stephen Hannock.
For a treat today. I couldn't pass up this opportunity, being a deadbeat artist, to talk on, when every chance you get to talk on these dazzling scholars who basically define history, you got to take it, because we're not around too often, and once we're gone, we can just wave from the clouds down and see what's going on. But we have to appreciate one thing first, right out of the chute. How cool is the name Tim Barringer? No, I'm serious. I think I've done some research on this, and I uncovered some archives on Ian Fleming. And it turns out that after the inevitable demise of James Bond, for the agent 008, he chose the name Tim Farrow. So when you swagger into these museums, expecting to hear history, from the source, it's like, Tim Barringer. Yeah, nobody's going to stop you. And this, of course, brings me to the very first time I met Tim, which is in my recent show at Marlborough in New York. And I walked into my exhibition, and in front of this 20-foot piece of Niagara Falls is this animated guy talking to a group of people that, a couple of folks there that could very well have been as old as his parents. And as it turns out, they were his parents. and he was going on about this stuff. And I was just fascinated. And I was equally as fascinated by this amazing show that Tim and Jason Rosenfeld co-curated on the pre-Raphaelites that shattered attendance records literally all over the world. At the Tate, National Gallery in Washington, Moscow, the Mori in Tokyo. I mean, this is unbelievable. And here he is coming to join us here. But I've witnessed his charisma in front of works of art in the Yale Art Gallery, in front of students, but also in front of passers-by. And that's a unique gift. And I know firsthand that Jock Reynolds, who we all thank every day for acquiring my Oxbow piece, which is over next door, and also lending it to us, with like 2 months' notice. Usually you have to reserve these things almost a year in advance, and Jock let us have it right out of the chute. But we know that we're in for a special treat today. So, in the words of my teenage daughter, here is the totally cool Tim Barringer.
How can I possibly live up to that? But thank you all very much. And I have to say, it is actually totally cool for those of us who have studied coal and church and written on them as historical phenomena, to actually see these two sites, first of all, come together, which is magical, and come alive in a way that engages coal and church with contemporary art making. And this was a place where art was made. It came alive here, and it's come alive in a new way through the amazing show that Stephen and Jason have put together. And I also want to say that I have just had what some of you will not yet have had, and you won't have until next spring, which is a peek into the new studio. And this is, as it were, really this is a new dawn for Cedar Grove and for this whole region. Because now there is a space where works of art from all over the world can be borrowed and they can be shown here. It's a space where contemporary artists, I'm sure, in the future will show their work as well. So Cedar Grove is now back where it was in the 1840s as the epicenter of art making, and not just in the region, but also really in the country. And I think that's incredibly exciting. And I want to offer my congratulations to the amazing group of people who funded this, who had the vision to put it together. It's very, very exciting to be here right now. So here's the man, Thomas Cole, and I want to talk today about coal and church, but particularly about coal. And Thomas Cole as a contemporary artist, and then to think about the way that the contemporary art that we see in the building now at Cedar Grove and across the river at Olana, in many ways engage with the same sorts of questions, the same sorts of issues, the same preoccupations and passions that drove this man who died extremely young, of course, but had, by the time he died, achieved very remarkable things. So let's take ourselves back to the sultry August of 1825, when the young Thomas Cole, born in Britain, but trained very briefly in Philadelphia, took the steam packet boat up the Hudson River. From Manhattan, he traveled about 100 miles upstream, arriving at the small, pretty gritty town of Hudson. There were no antique dealers in Hudson then, you can imagine. The broad waterway here is, of course, encircled with peaks and forests. We only need to look out of the window to see that. Cole did this at a momentous point in American history. Because that same year, the Erie Canal had opened, and indeed that's why there was a regular packet boat that he could catch. The Erie Canal, which linked and opened the great agricultural lands of the Midwest to the East Coast. This was essentially unlocking the great boom in the American economy that would dominate the 19th century. So Cole was there right at the beginning, and he was aware of these great historical events going on in front of him. We're looking here at a rather wonderful, rather prim little watercolour by an English watercolourist who had emigrated, like Cole, but a few years earlier, to America, John William Hill. And I'm going to come back to him because although he was a young man when he made this, after Cole died, this same artist, John William Hill, became the leader of the American Pre-Raphaelites. So interestingly, he had a much longer career than Cole. But in this work, Hill offers us a sort of plain-spoken image where he's really showing us how all this worked, how the canal barges went smoothly up and down this new artery. And you can imagine people and money and commodities and even eventually works of art shooting up and down this canal, which then linked to the Hudson River and down the Hudson to Manhattan, opening up, not only opening up this region, but also actually giving a huge boost to the businesses of the upstart city of New York. Don't forget how much, and if you work in the museum sector, this is still sometimes true, how much people in Boston and Philadelphia still look down on New York, let alone New Haven, Connecticut, that miserable little place. And so the vulgar upstart city of New York, with this sudden infusion of trade passing through New York into the center of the country. And Cole is really almost carried upriver by a sort of tsunami of interest, of capital, of new machinery, all these developments which constitute the Industrial Revolution. So this is where he's coming from. But of course, this is where he came. And it's the contrast between those two images which I think is what really makes Thomas Cole what he is today. The Hudson River was beautiful to him in contrast to the industrial world that he grew up in England, and in contrast to the sort of filthy mercantile city of New York. So Cole arrived up the Hudson River already imbricated with the aesthetics of the picturesque and sublime. He picked up this as an apprentice engraver in Liverpool in England before he ever came to America at the age of 17. He already knew the works of Turner and Constable in engraved form. He was aware of the traditions of landscape painting. But of course, what he did when he arrived here was something quite new. It was these early works from his early trips in 1825, 6, 7 that were exhibited in a storefront in Manhattan and appreciated there by Colonel John Trumbull, good Yale, as a breakthrough in American art. And I particularly want to draw your attention to this great work in Boston, a panel painting, one of my favorite of all Cole's early achievements, sometimes called Sunny Morning on the Hudson, sometimes called Round Top on the Hudson. Here we see an unabashedly romantic view of the topography of this region where we're standing now. The viewer's gaze passes wonderfully from this viewing platform in the foreground, dramatically spotlit in sunshine, a kind of celestial spotlight. And then we plunge into this area of darkness with this very mysterious mist, and it's not clear what happens if you fall off the edge here. You're just in the abyss, you're lost. And then our eye follows the composition around, and finally there's redemption in the form of the Hudson, the very river which leads us up to the Erie Canal or down to Manhattan. And there's even a couple of little modern boats on it to remind us, perhaps the very boat that Cole came up on, the boat that will deliver you away from Manhattan into this spiritual region. It's a brilliantly conceived painting for such a young artist, Cole in his mid-20s when he painted this. A really extraordinary achievement. A rugged painting, which references surely the theory of the sublime as laid out by Edmund Burke, which is to say that danger is more powerful than comfort, that the sublime is more powerful than the beautiful. So, and what Cole gives us here is, as it were, tribulation, challenge, and resolution, all within one composition. Quite a remarkable achievement. I want to just read to you what Cole wrote about the Hudson River. It's a familiar quotation from his essay on landscape scenery, but it's worth repeating. The Rhine has its castled crags, its vine-clad hills and ancient villages. The Hudson has its wooded mountain, its rugged precipices, its green undulating shores, a natural majesty, an unbounded capacity for improvement by art. Its shores are not besprinkled with venerated ruins or the palaces of princes, but there are flourishing towns and neat villas. The hand of taste has already been at work. Without any great stretch of the imagination, we may anticipate the time when over the ample waters shall reflect temple and tower, for temple we're in now, I think, temple and tower, dome and every variety of picturesqueness and magnificence. So he's almost, in his imagination, building Olana on the banks of the Hudson and imagining it transformed. But with that very same gesture, Cole also points out the problem. He also indicates a kind of melancholy trajectory, which is going to be absolutely central to his thinking. In other words, we have the wilderness now, and we're here, and the fact that we're here in these steamboats means that the wilderness is already under threat. That in fact, we will transform this by the hand of taste. I mean, he's looking on the bright side in his picturesque villas, but it's more likely to be dark satanic mills that get built on the Hudson. Cole is always thinking about the big historical view, the great sweep of history, and he was deeply ambivalent about the process of transformation that he himself was actually a part of, a symptom of. So at this point, I'd like to, well, first of all, I want to show you a nice picture of where we are, and the idea that Cole himself moved afterward from Manhattan to here, permanently based himself from certainly from 1836 onwards, but really from a little earlier than that, at Cedar Grove. So he becomes a kind of feature of this landscape. But I want to introduce to you an exhibition project, which is just taken shape now and just taken on an official existence. This is an exhibition which will be held in 2018, first at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City, and then in the National Gallery of Art National Gallery in London in the summer of 2018. And it's based around this picture, the Oxbow in the Met, a painting which has never left the United States before, a painting which was made 30 yards from where we're standing right now, and a painting which raises all the questions that I've just raised. A painting which gives us the wilderness and the glories of the untouched American landscape, its danger but also its beauty. And on the other hand, of course, it gives us civilization creeping from one side of the canvas to the other and making prosperous farmland, making probably picturesque villas, as he mentioned. So the big question here, and indeed the big question mark here, in case you were wondering, the big question is, are we ruining or are we improving? Is the country getting better? Are we heading to a kind of perfect Jerusalem, or are we in fact despoiling the land? Is this progress or despoliation? And a great tension in this painting. I think it's one of the great paintings of the 19th century, precisely because it raises those questions. In terms of art, of course, it poses the sublime against the beautiful, the turbulent against the peaceful. And this painting has been at the core of the Metropolitan Museum's American wing since 1908. It's really responsible for Cole's surviving reputation in the early 20th century. And what we wanted to do was to take this picture and put it back into a context which it hasn't largely been seen within. Namely, to look at Cole's origins in England and his concepts of history which developed from that. And then to think about the fact that this picture was made here at Cedar Grove shortly after Cole returned from a trip to Britain. So the question is, how do we put this story together in an exhibition context? Well, I just want to remind you, Cole was born in the north of England at the absolute peak moment of the Industrial Revolution. So we might juxtapose him with a watercolour like Turner's vision of Leeds, the industrial city in 1817, seen here with the smoke and the turbulence and the social dislocation, but also the energy and excitement of the Industrial Revolution. And it's just worth saying, Cole had actually seen the canal being dug through his native land near Bolton in Lancashire. He was born in Bolton. This canal snakes its way down from Bolton and Bury down to Manchester, the greatest industrial city in the world. So when he saw the Erie Canal being built, it was nothing new to him. He was seeing a pattern repeating itself from 35, 40 years earlier in the north of England. And that's a part of the course of empire, as I think we can think of this idea of the course of history that Cole was obsessed with. He also saw something very particular in the town of his birth, namely that one of the great industrial inventors of all time, Samuel Compton, who essentially was responsible for making the device that allowed you to produce cloth by machines, the Compton's mule, spinning mule. He'd seen this in front of his very eyes. He saw what changes can happen when mechanization takes place. He saw a move from essentially a kind of early modern world to a modern world. It happened while Cole was a child, and all the problems that can cause. So what we want to do in this exhibition is to assemble a group of works which give a sense of who he was, where he came from, and also what happened when he became successful in the 1820s. So this exquisite work, which is in the Hartford Wadsworth Athenaeum, this is from Montevideo, the view from Montevideo, well actually that's Montevideo, which is the wonderful summer house of Daniel Wadsworth, one of Cole's early patrons. And you can see here a little bit of that sublime left in this ruined tree here, but essentially this landscape of genteel refinement that Cole found from his patrons. But it was Wadsworth who said, if you want to make the real big time, you have to go back to England and to engage with the masters of landscape painting, such as John Constable. And Cole arrived in Plymouth after, 6.5-week voyage over the Atlantic. And he had one day to get to the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition before it closed. We've all done that, haven't we? We've all waited till the last day. And he was in a stagecoach, and it was raining, of course, because it's April in England. And he got there on the very last day of the exhibition, and he ran in and looked at this work by John Constable and immediately noted it. This is Hadley Castle. By chance, this picture is now also in North America. It's the Yale Center for British Art. And if you go to Yale now, it's on show at the Yale Art Gallery while the center is being renovated. And this picture, perhaps I think more than any other, showed Cole, as a young man who'd been painting fairly small pictures, what was possible in this medium. And this is the other picture that he saw when he visited Turner's studio. He saw Hannibal crossing the Alps. He saw it in here's Turner, who Cole found very disappointing because he was quite a smelly, vulgar, and if any of you have seen the film Mr. Turner, you'll know that he snorted all the time. He saw it in this room, which was Turner's own gallery. Right at the end here, usually, was Hannibal crossing the Alps. And for any of you who have seen the remarkable film by Mike Leigh, you'll know that they reconstructed the room absolutely perfectly with a reproduction of Hannibal crossing the Alps here. Here is the remarkable actor Timothy Spall, who plays Turner in the film. Here's Mike Leigh, the director. I really thought that was a very compelling reconstruction of the life of an artist in early 19th century Britain. And it was that world. If you want to know what it was like for Thomas Cole stepping into London Art Society in 1829, the film's a pretty good guide. I think it gives you a wonderful sense of the atmosphere of it. So imagine this young man. There were no major European landscape paintings available to look at in New York City at this time. And suddenly this young man has seen things like this and things like this. And his mind is full of the possibilities, what you can do. What can you do as an American as well, or as someone who's chosen to become an American? And the answer, of course, is, oops, sorry, this machine's getting ahead of itself. Yeah, this, there. In the studio here, he created this great series of paintings. These will also be in the exhibition. All the paintings I've shown you will be in this exhibition, we hope. So we want to put together what he saw in London with what he did when he got back. Because I don't want to reduce him to some kind of imitator of British art. No one in Britain was capable of making paintings as fantastic as these. And I say fantastic, they proceed from the imagination in a way that is quite unique in the period. So this, of course, is the course of empire. You're all Thomas Cole lovers. You don't perhaps need me to tell you that it's 5 paintings, starting here with the savage state, the pastoral state, consummation of empire, and then you get to this catastrophic vision of an empire falling to pieces, destruction, and then desolation. This is a sort of playing out of the grand sequences of history, which, of course, you can just look at these two pictures. You can see he's thinking, what can I do with this? And this is what he does with it, something quite new. What can I do with this great vortex? And here's what he does with it. So this is what Cole did when he got back, and that's what the exhibition, I hope, will demonstrate. Now, when we were thinking about this exhibition, we also thought about the ways that Cole, and this is long before the current Cedar Grove Marana show, River Crossings, was imagined. We were thinking about the way that we could connect this to current artistic developments. I'm going to actually come back to those in 1 second, sorry. And the answer is that actually there's already a contemporary artist who has responded to this. And remarkably enough, it's the Los Angeles painter, Ed Ruscha, who had created a series of works called Course of Empire, directly responding to Thomas Cole, the idea that the economy will change, that the world will change, and if you paint a big series of paintings that track the changes over time in a single place, you can illuminate the history of a nation. That's what Ed Ruscha did in these huge canvases that were shown at the Whitney about 10 years ago. But there are many, many more ways in which we can understand Cole's interest at this time as contemporary art, not just being, as it were, suggesting directly the ideas for contemporary artists. Because I wanted to go back to these two images. This is something that Cole saw in London. This will be in our exhibition. And this was the cutting edge of contemporary art in 1829. In fact, it was so hot that John Constable did not let anyone else see it unless you actually visited his studio and then you gained his trust. Now, why is this thing so dangerous? This thing is so dangerous because it's an oil sketch made using oil paints outside, capturing the flickering effects of light. You were supposed to do that with watercolor. You were not supposed to take oil paint and throw it around in this violent manner here. And Constable did that, but he certainly wouldn't exhibit such a thing in public because it would be considered vulgar and dangerous. So this is contemporary art. Now Cole, thinking about that, what does he do? He starts sketching in oils. Maybe not on the site, we're not sure. This would be one thing we need to work out is whether this painting was actually made on the spot or in the studio. But look how wild this painting is, and think of the wildness of Cole's brushwork. And I think you see how Cole was absolutely at the cutting edge of what was new in his time in 1829. Now, of course, we all know about what happened to Cole's reputation. After his death, he was canonized into a sort of saintly role as the founder of a school, founder of the American School of Painting. And in this painting, of course, by Asher Brown Durand, you see Thomas Cole and William Cullen Bryant, the two patron saints who sort of invented the American wilderness for art history. And we've got to know this whole sequence of events whereby Cole's student Frederick Church became the great leader of American art. Of course, this area has become so famous because their two houses stare at each other across the Hudson. And there they are. And there are lots of homages from Church to Cole. And of course, I show you this wonderful drawing because we can see the magic of the studio there, which is returned to us. And now this is the first time you can see that in 3D. I wanted to share with you, though, this image, which also allows me to disclose another trade secret, because this painting you may not know. This painting is by Thomas Farrow, who was another English artist who came to live in America for 20 years in the middle of his life. And it's called A Buckwheat Field on Thomas Cole's Farm. Oh. I'm thinking not far from where we're standing now, somewhere very close to here. Thomas Farrow made the effort to come all the way from New York just to stand in the spot where Thomas Cole had died. This is 1865, so it's just less than 20 years after Cole had died. Obviously, this was a sacred spot. The style is different. The style is very high key. The style has this amazing precision, almost photographic quality. And this is American pre-Raphaelite painting, which hasn't received the attention it deserves. And I think Thomas Cole is a kind of patron father figure for the American pre-Raphaelites, even though he died before they got going. This will be a central work in another exhibition, also in 2018, at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, organized by Linda Thurber. And everyone in this room must go to Washington to see that show. Their works on paper, they're very fragile. If you only have one venue, you have to go to Washington. But see it, and see this work, and see how Cole's influence rippled through the generations, and how new kinds of modern art making popped up out of the soil that we're standing in. Now, what I want to do now is say something unfashionable. Possibly you will start throwing things at me. I want you to stop using the phrase Hudson River School, please. Because this is I work with a lot of art students and undergraduates, and they love to make up insulting nicknames for the people that were before them. And that is precisely what the Hudson River School was. It was made up by a bunch of American artists, most of them now forgotten, who hung out in Paris, liked boring paintings by Corot, and drank a lot of coffee and had waxed moustaches, and they thought that Frederick Church and Thomas Cole and Bierstadt and Cropsey were the most embarrassing, like the embarrassing uncle at the wedding, the people you don't want to admit are in your family, because they painted regional, dull landscapes. It doesn't look even slightly French, so how can it be any good? And this is what, so they made up the most insulting name they could think of, which was Hudson River School, to make these people seem remote, dodgy, dowdy, out of touch, out of Paris, out of time. And so let's go back and call them, sorry, it's a little slow, it's worth it because I want you to read it. The first New York School. Okay, the founding of art in New York City. That's what these people did. The first New York School. And if we keep moving through pretty quickly, we'll see that they created these remarkable panoramic visions. This is Jasper Francis Cropsey, and of course the great Frederick Church, Twilight in the Wilderness, a work that was offered to Yale University Gallery for $100 in the 1960s and turned down. Really deeply upsetting. It's now Cleveland. And of course, how can you call it the New York School when this is based on a Vermont landscape and this is how can you call it the Hudson River School when this is based on Cotopaxi in Ecuador? There's nothing Hudson River about it, which is not to say it wasn't made here, but Church's imagination moved from Olana to the globe with Humboldt traveling before him. So let's get rid of the Hudson River School and think of the first New York School capable of producing these remarkable images of the West, or the South, or the North, any of those things. Now the second New York School doesn't need our help. They're doing fine. And of course, what we grew up thinking of as the New York School, in fact, turned out to be the second New York School. So I'd like to think of, Barnett Newman, the great Via Heroicus Sublimis of 1950, Rothko, and most interestingly, perhaps Jackson Pollock, as people who are the second great flowering of art in this region. And very interestingly, this point was made before. This point was made in 1976 in this exhibition curated by Robert Rosenblum at the Museum of Modern Art. Who knew that Church's Niagara had been shown at MoMA? Well, it was. It was shown at MoMA in 1976 for the bicentennial, where the comparison between these two paintings was already actually made. John Wilmerding, writing in the catalogue for that exhibition, I'll just quote it, said the following. On the one level, the literal or implied panoramic scale of the canvases from both periods, so Pollock's in 1950 and Frederick Church in 1857, from both periods, surely recall a continuing American association of the vast landscape with national identity. The pulsing surges of energy, seemingly uncontainable within the picture's framing edges, characterize equally the view of nature described in Church's Niagara Falls of 1857, and that embodied in Jackson Pollock's Autumn Rhythm almost a century later. The latter may be no landscape, but it is very much an American environment. So the first and the second New York schools, I think. Now, an interesting connection moving forwards towards the present day is Dan Flavin, another artist who was based up the Hudson Valley, preoccupied with light, with particular forms of light environment, just in the same way that Church and Cole both were. But of course, he created these minimalist sculptures using fluorescent light. But again, the preoccupations seem somewhat the same to me. And some of Flavin's drawings have a real landscape sensibility to them. And indeed, Flavin also collected drawings of the artists formerly known as the Hudson River School, right? The first New York school. So he understood the inheritance there. And, you know, I think you can start to make some very interesting connections between these two artists. But what I want to talk about for the rest of my time is, of course, the third New York school. And I'm very glad to say that the present exhibition really does something which digs very deep into the historiography and the kind of conceptual landscape of our field. Namely, it shows the way in which this region has been center and then periphery and then center again. That, you know, creativity started here in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and then moved downriver perhaps to the city in a moment when economically and in every other way this part of the world went through some tough times in the second half of the 20th century, or the middle of the 20th century. But that the energy has moved back here in a very fascinating way. And you know, if you think of Thomas Cole moving from Manhattan up to this region, that pattern has been followed by many artists in search of bigger studios, in search of some peace, in search of getting away from kale-eating people in Brooklyn who are just too politically correct for words. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons to get out of town. I think that balance between the mouth of the Hudson and the upper parts of the Hudson is really fascinating, and it's gone through these three stages: first, second, and third schools. Now, of course, the current exhibition gives us a chance to think across the two sites about how the energy that was present here in 1836, thinking about America, what is America, the spaces of America, the energies of the world, and the great patterns of history. These questions are still with us, and Stephen's here, and I do want to embarrass him now. But this painting clearly stands at the kind of origin of this whole nexus between Cole and Church, or rather this series of paintings that Stephen has done in relation to Cole's Oxbow as a kind of originary work of New York art, and returning to it and then adding layers over it as a kind of palimpsest, or rather like the sediment in some sort of geological landscape where you've got the Oxbow underneath, but things have built up on top of it. Things like personal memories, things like art historical discoveries, things which, if you go up close to the painting in Cedar Grove, and you have a wonderful opportunity to do it, it now is a promised gift to Yale University Art Gallery, so don't get too close, but look closely. And you'll read that the way that Stephen has created this painting is by adding multiple layers of paint and treating them, in some cases with industrial equipment, to get this amazingly enameled surface, rich but smooth, into which he's incised text. So it's almost as if Cole, you know, wrote text separately. He wrote the essay on American landscape while he was cogitating this painting. But here, text and image come together. It's almost as if we've been through the early modern world with Cole. We've had the modernist world with Jackson Pollock and the abstract expressionists. And now we're in a postmodern world where we can return to the various layers of history and interpret them through personal association, something that Cole would completely understand. I think he would have loved the idea that this painting has become wrapped into another man's imaginative landscape and then shared with a wide audience in that way. And of course, where better to see it? There is no better place to, even Yale Art Gallery, I have to say, there is no better place to see it than perfectly positioned in Thomas Cole's house, where the original associations were generated, and now a whole new set of as it were, third New York School associations have been added. So this exhibition is also very interesting because it's a timely collaboration between a practitioner, an artist who makes, and a historian, Jason Rosenfeld, a very good friend of mine and collaborator in many projects, currently on the beach in St. Lucia, otherwise he would have been here with us, he tells me. But I think it's very important to have those two voices, the maker and the analyst, the historian. And I think the catalogue, the beautiful book that goes with the show, really draws out those two perspectives together. Now, another of Steve's works is also, I think, very much worth your attention, a smaller, more modest scale, but an extremely beautiful work, Homage to the River Keeper. And this puts me in mind, and of course this is where I can say things, and he can stand up and say that's rubbish, which Turner and Thomas Cole can't do. But this reminds me very much of the work of James McNeill Whistler, an artist who was able to mobilize a kind of musical sensibility in his nocturnes, a work which he took from, a title which he took from the works of Chopin, the composer for small works for piano. And Whistler created nocturnes which were obsessed with questions of memory and association. So these little spots of light which represent, you know, somebody's home or some light in some particular place, a place that the artist has an association with. They're then reflected in the water here in the front. That's a very Whistlerian move, and again, you know, shows how contemporary art practice is often negotiating with a series of associations from art in the past. And many of the other artists in the show are also self-consciously engaging with the kinds of work that are familiar to us from Thomas Cole. So, for example, we're looking here at a wonderful photograph, which is also made in the very space where the oxbow was painted, the Connecticut River, Northampton, Massachusetts. This is Joel Sternfeld's East Meadows, Northampton, Mass. This is 2008, a digital sea print, a very grand work on the same sort of scale as Thomas Cole's oxbow. And I find this really fascinating because we can see an artist returning to Cole's landscape, which was painted in the fullness of summer. And instead of looking down on it from a great height, actually standing among the sodden fields in the valley, and as it were, entering that world that Cole looks down on. And also, we're no longer in high summer. We're now in this rather melancholy winter. But nonetheless, it's clearly a work which is haunted by Cole's memory. And also made in the Connecticut Valley, River Valley, in the Oxbow area, is this remarkable work. It's very interesting to me that photography, which was a new technique in Cole's day, it was brand new, the hottest thing, has now become almost a kind of old master technique, allowing for some very grand and remarkable works, such as Stephen Pitigorski's October Corn, early morning 2011, printed in 2013. This is archival inkjet, the medium here. And this, to me, takes up Cole's idea of wilderness, but then suggests, you know, many things. I think the decimation of the Native American population, who of course cultivated corn in some areas. This single standing monumental element right in the center of the composition seems to have the same force that the single Indian figure that Cole would sometimes add to his landscapes might have. So there's a deep melancholy there, suggesting decimation. But of course this is also returning to holy ground, the sacred ground that Thomas Cole himself had covered. And the work which I find the most utterly fascinating is a kind of mixed media assemblage which draws together objects from the collection, or rather objects borrowed, I think, especially for this exhibition, with objects for the collection. And that is the artists Angie Kiefer and Cara Hamilton. Apparently they met at Yale University, which is good to hear, but they bring together a range of objects, including this daguerreotype photograph of Cole, where he speaks to us with a remarkable clarity from beyond the grave. It's a unique object, and it's very unusual to be able to see a daguerreotype. There's only one, they're not multiples, there's only one of these things. And the daguerreotype is a very, very thin film of light-sensitive silver on the back of a piece of glass. So it's the most fragile form of photography. It's covered with a velvet overlay to protect it, but of course that also gives it magic. So when you raise that, you feel Cole is with you. And beneath it is Cole's wonderful collection of minerals. He was a sort of Ruskinian, Humboldtian scientific man who was interested in the geology of the area. But what this installation does is to cover these two historical objects with a kind of modern magic, which is created by this light installation, so that you get a kind of wonderful effect of light as if reflected from the surface of water, which takes us, as it were, from the present into the past to engage with these objects. It's a really numinous engagement, I think, with Cole. And it gives us a sense of being in something like a cabinet of wonders or a cabinet of curiosities, which I think, in a way, Cedar Grove has become in this exhibition. You open the door and you're in a jewel box of sometimes very small works of art, which have this tremendous presence and power. It's great to see clusters of Cole's works among contemporary art. That's where the first New York school and the third New York school can speak to each other. And I thought this was a particularly interesting juxtaposition, where we could see the work of Thomas Noskowski, which, if you can imagine it hanging in a white gallery in Chelsea, New York, might look completely abstract, just like an arrangement of colours on a page, and quite beautiful. But when it's placed here, when it's placed here, with the landscape juxtaposition and with the kind of everyday business of Cole's life around it, you can suddenly envision it in terms of landscape space. And I think that's a wonderful, it's almost like adding a layer of interpretation on top of the painting, as well as just simply showing it. It's a domestic work, of a domestic scale, with this wonderful range of blue colours in it, which you can see by looking out of the window. Those same changing blues and greens out of the window. So, in a way, putting these works into this house has actually made them better works of art. Don't tell the artist. But there's a way in which context can actually add layers of meaning and association, in the same way that Stephen adds them with text on his paintings. And I found this very beautiful work by Elizabeth Murray, who died in 2007, a really spectacular, fairly small painting, which again could take its place in the second New York school, alongside Rothko and the abstract expressionist painters, but put it in this exhibition, and I start seeing an oxbow. I start seeing landscape, space, and mark making, which suggests topography here. So again, something has happened, some magic, some curatorial magic has taken place here. I don't want to push the point too far, but I think there's a connection. Let's move across the river to one of my favourite buildings in the world, and the sort of craziest fusion of American Orientalism, the wonderful Olana. If any of you ever go to London, do go to Frederick Leighton's studio in London, which has the similar, it's certainly the interior there that's Orientalist, but it has a similar level of fantasy. The two institutions have both reinvented themselves in really interesting ways. When you move through the spaces of Cedar Grove or Olana, noting the historical interior, the hand-carved wooden balustrades and the door frames, you become aware that these buildings have been crafted by local artisans from local materials, even if the intention is to conjure up an Alhambresque palace. In fact, it's made by men of Catskill and Hudson. And they were placed in this landscape so that you could see the woodlands which actually produced the wood, which created these interiors. And I find that absolutely fascinating. Church, of course, would sit up in these high windows and make these remarkable oil sketches of the glistening Hudson River. And then the interior of the house, this is where I was thinking about these marvellous details that you find everywhere of wood carving, stenciling, and all the rest of it. Or these things attune your eye to looking for quite different things from what you would look for if you were in the Museum of Modern Art. And Church was interested, perhaps above all, in questions of detail. Grandeur of scale, but also detail. Wonderful concern with detail. He travelled, as we said, south, but he also travelled north. And I draw this work of his to your attention, The Great Icebergs of 1861, because when we enter the studio here, we can actually see a photographic equivalent, or some sort of similar aiming at the sublime that Church could create in a huge oil painting like this one, which is also reproduced in chromolithography. And then Lynn Davis gives us this very splendid work, Disco Bay, Greenland, which really does seem to sum up a sort of 20th, 21st century revisiting of that landscape of the sublime that Church had pioneered, and how fantastic to see it inserted into one of these great historical interiors. And, as if that weren't enough, here's Church's Niagara, but here is Lynn Davis's great Niagara, the Horseshoe Falls, Ontario, 1992. This is a gelatin print. This is, as it were, a modern way to conjure up these atmospheres here. John Ruskin, of course, seeing this painting, took out his handkerchief and tried to rub this off because he thought it was grease on the glass of the painting, because it was impossible to do that with oil paint. Clearly, it was just a reflection from a light in the art gallery. But Church had done it with oil paint in the actual painting, which was indeed sent to London to be chromolithographed. Now, in these great grand halls, we also see one of the great self-portraits of our day, which of course is this remarkable Chuck Close textile. Can one imagine that this is a textile? Hanging down in the space where Church himself might have been. I love the idea of Church coming downstairs, one of the great presences of the first New York school, and turning left and having a vision of one of the great presences of the third New York school, Chuck Close on the wall. It's really it's a great piece of hanging, superb. And then take a look at this already beautiful and fascinating object. Martin Puryear's eloquent looping sculpture, Question. It's fashioned from local woods from this part of the world, pine, ash, poplar, tulip poplar. And here it is in the kind of space you'd expect to see it, the pristine space of modernism. And of course the organic of the wood, the organic texture of the wood signifies against the harshness of the white. And then look at it here and see how it sings in this interior at Olana. See how Puryear's work appears balletic and graceful, uncurling its long neck like a plant in spring. And, you can imagine here, this work is called Question. It almost follows the contours of the question mark. And indeed, it follows the contours, if you like, of the oxbow. But what's interesting about it here, I think, is the way that it inhabits this space and seems to grow by juxtaposition with the neo-Islamic arch behind it. And those of you who've been to the Olana installation will know that you get each time you encounter it from a different, through a different enfilade of rooms, you see it afresh. You discover it 4 different times from 4 different points of view. A really remarkable work. But the work might also ask the same questions as the oxbow about progress, about prophet or poetry, about do we save the wilderness or do we cut the trees down? What is the value of the organic in a machine-driven world? I think this object above all in the exhibition is the one that raises the questions that Cole cared about. Here is nature. What do we do to it? How do we treat it? That's the question that I think Martin Puryear is asking. And I was just talking to Stephen about the installation of this, and apparently Martin insisted on it being moved till he was particularly happy with the way that the sculpture sat in relation to the interior. And I think you can really feel that he got it absolutely right when you see it installed. Well, I'm nearly at the end of my remarks, but I did want to do the same trick, actually, with this, which is the official, photograph from the art world of a very remarkable work. Maya Lin, Silver River, Hudson. This adopts the Archimedean viewpoint. If you imagine yourself flying high above the Hudson, and you can see here's the source of the Hudson, here it comes, so we're about here somewhere, aren't we? And here's the Long Island Sound, here's Manhattan, turning it into this strangely fragile but beautiful silver object. She transforms the flatness of the map into a three-dimensional sculpture that resembles the silver tendril or root system of some hothouse plant. And in this act of defamiliarization, after all, we know this image quite well, but when we hang it on the wall in silver, she defamiliarizes. She reminds us that maps are complex, maps are strange and wonderful things. And also, it makes us think of the effort Thomas Cole took to get up the river, past the Palisades, all the way up here to Catskill. But this is my trick, because here the object looks, I think, 1,000 times more effective than it did against white. And this is a canvas. It's actually an unusual Hanek canvas, I think it's fair to say, which has absolutely nothing in it. It's a Hanek Rothko, in a way. Stephen prepared this canvas in the colour of the wall at Alana, in order, I think, practically to allow you to hang the thing on the wall. But actually, it also lifts it out in this magical way, so that we get Maya Lin's River, Stephen Hanek's staging of it, and then Frederick Church's backdrop of this interior that he so carefully curated himself. So here's a kind of wonderful moment of connection between the third and the first New York schools. And I think this is one of the most moving moments in the entire River Crossings exhibition, when you see this glistening thing and then you suddenly recognize that that's the river. That's the river. And then you look out of the window and there's the river. And it's silver. And that is a great moment. It's really one of the great American moments. Cartography and topography. Imagine geography. These are the things that Cole was fascinated with. And they mingle in the work of Jerry Gretzinger, whose artistic career has been devoted to a single and frankly somewhat crazy project, which is to create an imaginary map which just goes on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He's the kind of Kurt Schwitters who made these rubbish pictures, these Märzbilder. This is the sort of modern version of that. And if you go up close, as I'm sure you have, you'll find that these are reproductions of elaborately handmade maps of places that don't exist, places that only exist in Jerry's imagination, a fictive world. He's produced more than 3,000 8 by 10 inch panels, and is continuing it, and it'll go on forever because it has to go on forever. It's got a logic that can't be stopped. I find this really fascinating in this world. I mean, imagine the fact that when Cole lived in this house, there were no maps of this area. He had to figure it out for himself. You couldn't buy a map of the Hudson River Valley area that had the footpaths and the roads on it. There just was no such thing. So, in a way, Cole had to invent his own maps as well. And I think, this is a kind of mapping. The reason I keep coming back to this picture is I think it's in the back of the mind of many of these artists. And I wanted to share with you this work, which I must admit I didn't quite know what to do with when I first saw it hanging in Olan. This is by Elijah Berger, called Sleep Has His House for Antonio. 2012, coloured pencils. And of course, what one first becomes fixated by is this strange pictogram in the middle, and there is no, to my knowledge, we don't know what he means by it, what it suggests. It's a sort of, cultic, mysterious, occult symbol. But actually, once you stop worrying about that and you look at the rest of the picture, you realize that this is an artist deeply connected to the other, as it were, the other first New York school that I was mentioning to you, the American Pre-Raphaelites, the New Path movement, who read articles in the Crayon magazine by Asher Durand and started creating these hyper-real, fixated visions of nature in the 1850s and early 60s. This work by Worthington Whitridge will be in the exhibition I mentioned in Washington, so look out for it. And you can see, I think, how it animates a contemporary artist like Elijah Berger. And just to share a few more works which really set off resonances in my mind, I thought these were really very, very beautiful images by Leitha Wilson. This is Storm Cloud Circle Fold. And this, rather like the second work of Stevens I showed you, seems to me to have a kind of eloquence that takes you back into the world of someone like James McNeill Whistler. And it's an absolutely brilliant idea to hang it high above this blue door, because this is actually a photograph. But it's a photograph that's been folded like one of those Japanese fans that Frederick Church and his wife would no doubt have had for their summer guests to keep themselves warm, cool in the evenings at Olana. It's a really remarkable thing. This artist messes with photography. She folds it up. She makes these beautiful prints and then she folds them. But also she pours concrete on them. And I found this a really fascinating work called Rock Hole Punch, Utah Canyon, produced in 2014. It combines a saturated photographic print distressed by some kind of violent punching with a big lump of concrete. And this is actually one of the lightest of her works. Some of them weigh up to 400 pounds because they have concrete photographs. It's a bizarre connection. But look at it at Olana and you suddenly start to see all sorts of questions emerging from it. Because the photograph part looks like a scientific Victorian study of rock strata, a very, very precise thing that Ruskin might have done, or the American Pre-Raphaelites. But then there's this huge intrusion in the middle of industrial concrete. Deadly, dull, boring industrial disc, right in the middle of this beautiful landscape of strata. It's almost as if, when you're wandering up in the wilderness here, you suddenly encounter a 6-lane highway or a site of fracking or some kind of industrial despoliation that's destroying the wilderness. And this work, I think, more than any other, does what Cole did, which is to warn us about the dangers of industrialism and nature by juxtaposing ancient strata, local, sacred, with the bland, multinational, pocked surface of global industrialism. I think the projector's trying to tell me something. Time's up. Well, this is my last work that I want to discuss. I think River Crossings is an incredibly brave venture. In the era of the airport, the airport artist, ready to travel, any biennale, I'll be there. This is art that talks about place and belonging, about being here. And I think this work is really fascinating example of it, because it shows us what can happen when you start rethinking the ruins of empire as Thomas Cole imagined them in his American Sublime. So what we have here, out on the terrace at Olana, is this strange thing that looks initially like some kid's Lego. And you're thinking, what on earth is that doing there? Especially since the trees have now been cropped and you get this incredible view across the view shed. But as you start to look more closely, you see a kind of acropolis or campus of ruined buildings here. You see something classical, something historical emerging. And you see, in fact, what Cole had envisaged in this great work, which you're going to have in your exhibition next year. This is the architect's dream. Here's the architect, and this is what he's imagining. But you see it all coming horribly to grief, to catastrophic ruination. And that, of course, is Thomas Cole's vision in the course of Empire. The dream builds to a climax, and then it fades out in complete chaos at the end. But actually, we have a large version of that there. But actually what Cole gives us in this picture, those of you that know it well will have to just believe it. Those of you who don't know it will have to believe me. Those of you who know it well will know that up here there's something really fascinating, which is that in the landscape of ruin at the end of a story, there's also the image of rebirth, that there is actually a bird nesting on top of this ruined column. So when we see ruin, we actually also see rebirth. And I think what's really fascinating about this exhibition is that it takes the history of the Hudson Valley, which went from artistic creativity, economic buoyancy, through in the 20th century to some very, very hard times. And it actually predicts, and indeed is a symptom of, a kind of rebirth that shows that the course of empire is not actually an up and down, But as Thomas Cole told us right at the end of his cycle, it is a cycle. And that, the first New York school, the second New York school, will lead to the third New York school and a rebirth. Thank you very much.
Questions, and then you can just bombard him at the reception. We're going to have a reception right on the porch. You're welcome to walk in and see the exhibition and all these things you saw today. So.
Sure, that's one of it, yeah.
Who were the genius curators that conceived and put together this Hudson Crossing River show?
Well, one of them is Stephen Hannock right there, and the other is Jason Rosenfeld, who is an art historian who teaches at Marymount Manhattan College. So what I wanted to emphasize was that it's an artist who has a wonderful set of connections in the art world and a real vision of what's going on, and an art historian who can give that the historical context and the, as it were, an interpretative lens through which to look at it. And that's unusual. You don't usually have a double act of that quality curating a show. So I give full kudos to both. And I really enjoyed the chance to share it today. Final question.
Given that the Hudson River School art is traveled widely, why would you limit it to New York, first New York school, the first American school?
Good question. John Singleton Copley might be a problem. No, I mean the point is they were based here, but they weren't limited to that. I mean the same argument I suppose applies. But somehow nobody ever used the term New York City to imply provincial. It's the fact that the term New York School was, I'm not sure who invented it. Was it Dore Ashton? Somebody writing in the 1950s invented this to describe Pollock, Rothko, and it was a celebration of the fact that they belong in the greatest city of the world. All due respect to Hudson, New York, but no one ever quite thought that it was the center of the world. And it was because the Paris-based Americans wanted to use that as a negative. That's why I prefer New York. But why do I prefer New York to American? Well, that's interesting, isn't it? It would be tricky because then you're making a claim about the whole of the Americas. If you want to call it the first United States school, that cuts Copley out of it. It doesn't quite have the same ring as the first New York school, right? But I agree. In fact, these names are always a bit silly. And art historians spend a lot of time making up names for things, and then the next lot of art historians say that's not true. So luminism is the great one, right? Totally factitious, doesn't exist, made up. It's rubbish, it just doesn't exist. But it was made up very effectively to identify a group of people whose works look the same, so we have to make up a name for them and call them a movement, even though they didn't know each other. That's an example of a factitious art historical name, so I shouldn't be making up names for anyone. And all I would say is let's be clear how important these artists are worldwide and not just locally. I mean, the great thing about this show is it's both local and international, and that's what we need to do. Thank you.